The pace of technological innovation is visible all around us. Digital tools exist these days that make our lives easier and more convenient than ever before. But if you pause to think for a while, you might wonder, is everybody truly feeling the benefit of all of this innovation that's around us? If you have found yourself wondering that, then you are in the right place here at the Disruptive Innovation Festival, because we are joined to help us explore this topic by Zach Piester, who is the co-founder and partner of Intrepid Ventures and has deep experience in the creation and the development of digital technologies and blockchain startups. Zach, it's wonderful to have you with us here at the DIF. Welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is going to be fun.
It certainly will be. Before we get started, I just want to remind our viewers, if you've been to the DIF before, or if you're new, let you know for the first time, that this is a conversation. The DIF is not just a presentation to you. We want to invite you to get involved in our discussion this evening here in the UK, wherever you are around the world. You can do that in a few different ways. If you're on the ThinkDiff website, then alongside the video will be a comment section. Please put any comments, any thoughts, any questions into that comment section. I'm joined in the studio by a producer who will be sharing those questions with me, and I'll be putting them through to Zach. If you found your way to our YouTube page, then you can enter your comments and questions into the YouTube channel, and they'll also find their way to me through the wonders of technology. And finally, we will be using Twitter and the hashtag ThinkDiff. So post your questions there, or your comments or thoughts, and we'll see them as well. So with that, Zach, I'm going to jump straight into the meat of this topic. Who isn't benefiting from technology these days?
If you look at it population-wise, about 4.5 billion people globally. Most of the world is the working poor, and that's 4.5 billion people. In that 4.5 billion, you have 2.5 billion that are at the base of the pyramid that, for all intents and purposes, are operating outside of the normal financial ecosystems that you and I participate in. And so when we think broadly about innovation and the advent of new and emerging technologies, most of the world has a cell phone, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're getting the emerging innovation from the rest of the world's entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs and large corporations. It doesn't filter down to them because they are poor.
Is that you? You write quite a lot about this topic, and in one of the articles I was reading, you talk about the difference between digital and innovation. Is that kind of what you're getting at here?
Yeah. Just because you have access to a mobile phone and the internet does not mean that you're getting equal access to innovation, right? So particularly in Southeast Asia, where you have the majority of venture capital funding going into e-commerce sites and food delivery apps, right? How is that going to benefit a migrant worker or somebody at the base of the pyramid that earns less than $10 a day? They're not going to be ordering food, although they can download the app. Are they going to download Uber Eats, right? It just and banking applications and everything else, everything from Tinder to Facebook, although Facebook's a little bit different from a messaging perspective. But most of the world's entrepreneurs are focused on innovation, so building products and solutions that the rich can afford. Food delivery, in its current form, is an application for the rich.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess I think of places like Kenya, or even other places in Africa, where we know that the penetration of like mobile phone technology is fantastic. There's kind of the access to those handsets is not something that's a challenge. But I guess what you're getting at here is that the innovations that those kind of developers are creating using those technologies are simply focusing on a really narrow slice of the population worldwide and solving for their problems.
Yeah, I mean, the vast majority of venture capital going into startups does not address people that presumably don't have any money. We'll talk a little bit more about economic dead capital later on, but the presumption is, and they're very, very wrong, in terms of particularly the working poor, that it's not an addressable market in terms of the applications that are being built, the innovations, particularly innovation in terms of these corporations that have these very large innovation departments, R&D teams. Like literally nobody's building, with the exception of very few people, are building for this base. And I think it's really, really kind of stupid, actually, when you have 4.5 billion people that are in this market segment, that if you really look at the numbers, actually have very, very powerful, economic power in the global ecosystem.
Yeah, so it's a potentially enormous user base for any new products being developed. Yeah.
Huge.
I mean, why is that? Why are the developers, or why is the venture capital kind of pouring into these particular types of developments and completely ignoring what we're kind of finding out here is actually an enormous potential opportunity? Yeah.
So look, there's a couple of perspectives I can offer, right? So I'm deep into the blockchain and cryptocurrency space, which is dominated by, cypherpunks and crypto anarchists. There is certainly an ideological belief, and I think this has been consistent throughout human history, is that those that are in power want to keep that power and keep the poor poor and keep the poor divided. So I think there's a political ideological belief, may or may not be founded in terms of the statistics behind it, but it's certainly a lot of the discussions that we've had over the years. The second piece, and fundamentally, it is this assumption that poor people don't have money.
Okay.
Like poor people, so if you look at, so Hernando de Soto is a very famous economist out of South America, and was looking at why people are poor and why people have been consistently poor. And there's a number of really good books, and I'll post in the links on this. But Hernando de Soto basically was able to break this down in terms of property rights. So if we look at historically why people remain poor, is they don't have access to legally enforceable rights to the property in which they own, but may not be registered in a civil registry somewhere. And so when you look at most of the world's working poor, they have a farm, they have a village, they have a food stall, they have something that has been in their family for generations, or even multiples of generations, that they cannot loan against, that they cannot borrow against, they cannot establish credit against, because there's no civil registry stating that in fact they do own it. And if there is one, it's largely corrupt.
Yes. Yeah. This reminds me of another point that you raised in one of the articles I was reading earlier, which is that the technological divide, which is undeniable that exists, is not. It doesn't mean what perhaps people think first, that there are huge segments of the population simply not able to access some of the cool, useful technologies that we can. So taking an Uber to work or food delivery, as you say, that's actually not the real issue with this. It's the fact that an enormous segment of the population is being locked out of these kind of legal and financial systems that the world runs on.
Right. So let's back the bus up. Right. So there's in the NGO world and in developing economies, most of the economists agree that there are fundamentally three challenges that affect poverty and exclusion. One is lack of civil registries for vital statistics. So you and I can go to our city hall or local government and get our birth certificate. We can death certificates, marriage certificates, business certificates, and most of the emerging economies around the world, they don't have that. And if they do, it's largely corrupt and it doesn't matter. The ability for the poor to enter into legally enforceable contracts, and identity. Without having a globally recognized, with high degrees of attestation that you are who you say you are, you cannot enter into these traditional financial ecosystems, right? So there's pretty significant barriers to entry that cause this group to remain consistently poor. The real sad part of this is the technology exists to solve these very problems, right? So if you look at with the advent of blockchain, so for those of you that don't know, blockchain is essentially an incorruptible ledger of transactions. So once a transaction gets entered into the blockchain, it's immutable. It's there forever. So you can record everything from birth certificates, death certificates, property rights, identity, on and on and on. And this moves away from being a legally enforceable contract, but a software enforced contract. If you believe in the cryptography, then you believe in this. Most of the world's largest companies and banks are moving towards this. We can literally affect 4.5 billion people today by creating these civil registries around the world, giving people an immutable, recognized identity. And by doing that, all right, stay with me here. By doing this, if you have identity and civil registries in which you can record transactions that can't be corrupted by the corrupt official in your village, market, or city, then you have people that can actually loan against or establish credit against their existing businesses, right? This is widely viewed anywhere between $5 and $10 trillion of economic dead capital in the marketplace today because people don't have access to these things. And it literally can be solved today, but with that one little change, with that one little change, right? But if you look at it, Asian Development Bank in 2016 compiled, it was 2016, is about $35 billion went to organizations to help with poverty and financial inclusion. Less than $200 million of that actually went into programs on the ground to address some of this. 200 million out of 34 billion, right? So it's scary. So we got to think about, like, what is the actual problem here? It's the people. And it's vested in incumbent interest. There's a lot of really, really good people working in these organizations, but ultimately, you give them $100 and they spend 95 of it on administration, doesn't actually go to the programs. Blockchain and these registries and these ledgers and the surrounding technology around this removes all those layers, removes all the corruption, and it keeps it transparent, secure. Yes. Then we have the world's largest middle class overnight. I mean, it's literally that simple.
And are there any organizations who are tackling this? Is this, I mean, to hear you say it sounds like such an obvious change that needs to happen. Surely there must be someone out there who is doing this. Do you have examples of organizations, companies that are implementing some of this technology for this purpose?
Well, look, there's a lot of really good blockchain companies that have developed identity solutions. So this is one of the real, and I say real, I mean, it's an actual use case in which the technology is ideally suited for. So there's quite a few blockchain companies doing this. There are quite a few number of aid organizations, UNESCO, I know IFC, World Bank, and some other large NGOs are looking at ways in which they can deploy the technology to create identities for particularly immigrants and in these immigrant camps with refugees coming from Syria and other war-torn nations. Again, the problem is incumbent thinking and incumbent, dare I say, corrupt political and government organizations that don't want to give up their power.
No, the change almost seems too kind of frightening. It's going to be too upsetting to their system.
Well, human nature. Why would you? If your entire government and your own wealth is predicated on the backs of the poor, human greed. And we look at some of these despots and just I'm not going to name out certain governments in Southeast Asia, but people know who they are. It's not in their best interest to do this.
No. So, Zach, we've talked about the importance and the power of people's identity and kind of giving them control or kind of allowing them to be identified and identifiable. What are some of the other kind of similarly powerful areas of focus that can be targeted and have a similar kind of effect? Or is identity really the only one, or the one that needs to be tackled first?
Well, look, it has the biggest market right? So if we look at it strictly from a financial and a return perspective, 2.5 billion people suffer from lack of identity or not enough identity to be able to participate in the global financial ecosystem. Right? That's a big one. Besides the truly altruistic vision of lifting societies from poverty, the reality is these people do have money, they do work, and they are already participating in a very, very large extra legal financial ecosystem. Some call it the black market, whatever you want to call it, but these people work on a cash basis.
The informal economy, I've heard it called.
Yeah. And look, that's just if you've ever been poor, you don't have credit, you don't have a bank card, you don't have a bank account, checking account, access to loans. You operate on credit and relationship and reputation and trust. And so we really dive into these ecosystems. You have some incredibly savvy financially savvy poor people on how to survive, how to make $1 last a day. How do I feed my family for the next 30 days on little to nothing, right? So there's a lot of savvy, there's a lot of opportunity. The identity is a big one from a financial services perspective. Yeah. Another big one that we've worked on for a number of years and worked on with some very large insurance companies is health insurance for the poor in a peer-to-peer network. So utilizing blockchain technology with some other layers of artificial intelligence and advanced analytics to provide a peer-to-peer network of insurance for the poor. And what I mean by this, right, is if you're really at the base of the pyramid where every single day that you work is absolute vital. If you don't work, you don't feed your family. What happens if that person gets injured or sick, right? If he loses 1 day of income, his family does not eat for that day. And so very, very low margins. Like, if this guy's, if he's making $10 a day, we're talking, 20 cents, 25 cents to provide coverage if he had an injury or catastrophic injury that his family's covered, for very nominal amounts that his family can actually eat while he's recuperating or she's recuperating. And that's very, very powerful stuff. So insurance, and again, you have to have identity, reputation, trust, and this is all built in how you use the blockchain technology. Okay. It's powerful. It's powerful stuff, man.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing how these things that we perhaps take for granted, those of us who it's available to and who it's just been part of our daily lives, you don't necessarily think that the power of having something as simple as a verifiable identity can have. And the fact that the blockchain can be utilized to do that is remarkable. And it makes me kind of frightened to think that there aren't more initiatives out there, or even more visible initiatives out there that are doing this.
Well, and trust me, man, the banks know about it. All right. So we've worked with some of the largest banks in the world, and particularly in Asia. And because of the way that they're structured, they cannot create or will not create or unable to create the new business model, the design of new business models to accommodate that. And that's, and there's some very, very, very good executives of some of these companies that see it and have pitched it and have ultimately had to move on from those banks because they knew this was the right thing. And they knew it was a really big moneymaker for the bank, right? So look, if you can actually lift, 150 million people out of poverty in Indonesia, right? And just by creating and structuring new programs, I mean, there's a huge win there. So there's some very, very good people working on it, but this stuff is hard, especially in large corporations, that they're just not set up to accommodate this type of change.
No. So that sounds to me like it's definitely the or a role for startups and entrepreneurs to play in kind of getting this rolling. I know we, here at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, we're talking all the time about large system change in the context of a circular economy, and we talk about that similar thing. We find that with the largest organizations, they're locked into a particular way of doing things that's dominated the kind of industrial economy for centuries. And we are talking about a completely new way of doing things that is frightening to some, difficult to most. And then you've got startups who come in and they've got the kind of freedom and the flexibility, the agility to do something, to lead the way. And that's what's happening. And it sounds to me like that's kind of the case in this area as well. I mean, what would, if you could kind of pick one issue or one thing to do to change that, to make it so that the banks or the big corporations or whoever it is who has the power to make the change see the value in doing it and do it, what would it be? Is there something that can change to make that happen? Or is that just pie in the sky hopeful?
No, I mean, this is like the world's easiest fix. I mean, literally this shit's easy. Excuse my French. You know, it's really, really easy when you look at it from a human behavior perspective. All you have to do is change the incentive mechanisms in an organization that allow them to participate in these types of new initiatives, that compensate them and incent them with their bonuses to create these new programs using the new technology to build these new models to tap into new markets. Really, it's about future-proofing their business.
Yes.
And when you look at most of organizational behavior, right, a good chunk of an organization's people behave based upon the compensation and how they're incented, right? Now you couple that with, there's some very, very good people that think about doing the right thing and building right things and building things that matter. That's important to them as well. But at the end of the day, you know, if it comes between, you know, getting my bonus or not getting my bonus because I think it's a cool thing, most people are going to get their bonus. Or if they don't, they go to a startup and they're that deeply vested and interested in that, they go into startup and try and solve that problem.
Yes.
So, human behavior, man, I'm telling you, humans, like, I love them, but like at the end of the day, some of these, it's the human behavior and the organizational design of these organizations that really cripple innovation. It cripples innovation for the entrepreneurs that may want to work in at this base of the pyramid to live, you know, for building things that matter for the poor. But again, they don't see any money in it either because they're not going to get the venture capital investment,
No.
you know, nor are the banks going to adopt the technology at scale.
No,
because they can't.
I want to just to kind of shift back to the blockchain
Okay.
discussion a little bit, and probably something that's been interesting for me to read about kind of in preparing for this discussion. But I've come across a lot of kind of explainers or articles about, particularly about Venezuela. So I'm talking about a very particular case here, but about how Venezuela, which is obviously a country that's gone through, you know, quite significant crisis in recent years, that's led to significant problems with the economy, and their kind of their currency is suffering from hyperinflation. And as a result, the people who needed a solution have turned to blockchain and to cryptocurrency to kind of solve their immediate problems. Is that a good sign for you? Is that something that's replicable and that is working and is potentially kind of a longer term solution to these kind of issues?
Unfortunately, there is a corollary between hyperinflation, despot governments, corrupt governments, massive economic fail in these emerging markets around the world. You know, and when that fails, we do see those that have the ability to use Bitcoin and cryptocurrency as both a store of value and an exchange of value, because there's nothing else. I mean, this is a matter of survival. So it's sad that Venezuela, through its dictatorship, has just absolutely destroyed that country and destroyed its natural resources. At the end, the people have to eat. They have to do something. And those that had opportunities, you know, can use cryptocurrency to buy things, to hold what little money they have left in the form of cryptocurrency.
Yep. So it's really been a case of like last resort. They've had to do it, and thank goodness they've been able to turn to this technology that exists to be able to meet that need, because I suppose, you know, many countries haven't been able to in the past, and that's obviously been led to enormous difficulty on the ground. But it's not it's not in reflection on kind of a larger scale shift in attention towards using these technologies to solve those problems, which is what we really are.
The irony in all that I've been saying, right?
Yes.
Is blockchain is a rich people's application. You know, for now, if we look at where the technology and the application is being deployed, it's not yet. It was at very few instances hitting the base of the pyramid and most of the working poor.
Yes.
It's just not there yet, right?
No. Do you think is it a case of, or maybe not a case, but a result of the fact that maybe a lot of the development and the kind of this entrepreneurial activity is happening outside of the locations where the benefit would be felt or is needed most? Do we need kind of more stimulation of the kind of skills and the capabilities to develop these solutions on the ground where they're needed?
Interesting point, right? So if we look at, we're a global company. We've been doing blockchain since 2012. We both invest in and build blockchain powered systems. We have a very robust deal network from around the world. Where we see most of the interesting innovation in terms of blockchain are coming from markets and countries that they're not as bad as Venezuela, but they might as well be, right? And so you have at least you have some development capabilities, some very strong developers, very strong cryptologists, computer scientists that are developing these applications relative to what's needed within their homeland, right? Because they see it, they see the corrupt governments, they see the challenges in banking, they see the challenges in property ownership, and they see where their world is headed, and they're actually developing things that focus on solving some of these problems. We don't see that in the U.S. We don't see it. We see some of it happening in Western Europe, but in the more developed, more mature first world markets, you know, the focus, a lot of the focus is on how do we actually deploy the technology for enterprises? How do we make banks more money? Which is fine. I have nothing against it. And we're building applications and solutions and systems that help enterprises deploy the technology to engage in new markets, right? In how do you build technology that allows supply chains to be transparent, secure, and remove 50 different layers of corruption so that the farmer actually gets a bigger percentage of the pie that he's created. So it's happening.
Okay, well that's at least kind of gives reason for some optimism, and it's not all a negative picture that we're painting.
I'm a Debbie Downer, man. They call me in the company the dream crusher. Like I'm a total dream crusher. At the end of the day, look, you have some of the smartest people in the world working on some of this stuff. You have some very good big companies that are exploring it. The challenge, all right? So let's just be real, okay? I can't be any other way. The number one reason why you don't see these large-scale enterprise deployments in these organizations, beyond the things that we talked about, and this is it's a technology limitation. Existing blockchain protocols don't allow for the scalability, security, and governance that an enterprise needs in order to deploy it. Bitcoin does one thing really, really, really freaking good, and that's being able to exchange value in a peer-to-peer network. That's it. It does it phenomenally. Ethereum came into the market, right, Vitalik Buterin, and created Ethereum, which allowed to take that functionality to one step further and said, okay, let's be able to add multiple people into that transaction. Whereas Bitcoin, I can send money to you to somebody else. I can bring, you know, the producer into the conversation. All of us can enter into an agreement called a smart contract, and we can all interact without having to trust one another. Ethereum, by its own very design limitations, doesn't have the scalability to be able to work in a large financial institution or any other institution. So there's new protocols that are being built. You know, Metabase is one, Metabase.network. EOS is another one. Cardano is another one. So there's really amazing new protocols that address these scalability and governance challenges in enterprises, so that if we can realign the human behaviors, the human factors, solve some of the technology problems, that we can actually have massive scalable deployments of the technology that can reach out to the rest of the world.
Yeah, that is I mean, it kind of boggles my mind, to be honest. There's, I mean, I've always known that the kind of crypto space has been kind of rapidly growing and expanding. But I mean, it's good to know that there's more to it and there's more opportunity for it than simply kind of the store of value or kind of creating some new kind of trading mechanism for the wealthy in the West. To it.
So let's talk about innovation cycles, right? So I know this is an innovation festival, right? So I've helped build many of the larger corporate innovation groups and some very large companies around the world. And I've spent most of my career building innovation and growth capabilities for these organizations. Innovation cycles in a large organization average between 5 and 7 years, right? Sometimes longer, but typically a typical innovation cycle is 5 to 7 years, right? Of which a new emerging technology has some level of deployment within an institution, whether it be incremental or disruptive. I don't like the word disruptive, but for the sake of the audience, we'll just label it those two. And in general technology, we see these innovation cycles of 7 to 10 years where new technologies come into play and have some form of traction. The innovation that's happening in the blockchain space, these cycles are ridiculously short. We're talking 6 to 12 months where you're having, your mind might be blown one day with something that somebody's working on. And 3 months later, that is absolutely obsolete because the amount of thinking, the amount of intellectual horsepower going into this from, I mean, most of the larger research institutions, the large banks, largest corporations in the world are all throwing shit tons of intellectual capacity at this. And the pace at which things are moving, like I've been in the space for a very, very long time. I've never seen this move that fast where the biggest challenge is how do you stay ahead of the innovation curve? Right?
Yeah.
It's hard.
We've got a question that's come through from the audience. It's taken them a while to get their question asking muscles flexed. But someone's asked what we can do to help these technologies reach scale. And I'm assuming here that this question's come from the individual's perspective. Is there kind of stuff that we can do to make blockchain technologies or any of these technologies that we've talked about kind of reach the scale that they can have the impact we want?
Yeah, you know what? This is a really good question. So this is all about community, right? And joining communities that are building products, systems, and solutions that matter. By joining that community, right, you not only get informed, educated, and hopefully entertained, but you can take these experiences into your own organizations, right? So this is all, a lot of this is grassroots. So like Metabase, for example, right? So when Metabase, and it's one of our protocols, so just in full transparency, but you can go to Cardano or some of these other projects, join their communities, join their Telegram groups, join their meetup groups, be part of that community so you can take that learning, those experiences into your, whatever your role may be within a corporation or a startup or as an entrepreneur. The more people that are actually utilizing the technology to build and deploy, you know, that's the biggest thing. In most innovation cycles around the world, right? And this is just going back hundreds and hundreds of years. Most of the disruptive innovation, you know, these are the products, the solutions, the companies that don't have all the bells and whistles. The product may not look as good as the competitors. It may not have all the functionality. But what happens is you have this mass adoption in this grassroots community, people using it, that ultimately when the big companies finally look at it to either protect themselves from the threat or acquire that threat for protection or deploy it, that it's too late for them to do anything else except to engage and participate in that ecosystem.
Yeah, great answer to a great question. And I think that's a good point for us to kind of wrap up what's been a really interesting discussion. That point of community and kind of rallying together to make this happen by engaging, by participating. That's what this is all about. Participating in these technologies, I think, is a really kind of exciting call to arms for everyone out there who's interested in this. Zach, this has been really enjoyable. I've thoroughly enjoyed kind of learning so much about a topic that is interesting to me, fascinating, in fact.
Awesome.
The DIF, for those of you who are watching, who've joined, is only at the start. This is the first week. We've got 2 more weeks to go. So there are tons more sessions to capture your imagination. Tonight, you can hear from Lucy Poulet, who is from the European Space Agency. That's going to be in our studio here on the Isle of Wight. And Lucy is going to talk about some real fascinating innovations that they're working on in the Space Agency to try and keep astronauts alive, which is obviously crucially important when we're sending them out into space.
That one's going to be super cool. If I can add, for more information on how we view innovation and how we look at utilizing the technology and how it's being deployed, go to blockchainreview.io. It's one of our blogs. It's completely agnostic in terms of protocols. It's just how do we actually do it? How do we engage? And how do you become part of the community?
Super, thanks. We'll make sure that that information is available in the comments section beside this video when it goes live, or when it is available to watch on the session page. So everything you need to read up more and understand more about this topic will be available for you. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of the Disruptive Innovation Festival. Zach, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Cheers.